Welcome to the newest episode of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. I've got several items to talk about in today's episode, including one silly season rumor that I've heard from a pair of sources in the last couple of days that could be a benefit to Kyle Busch in 2025. A look at this past weekend's F1 race and why what happened is a good thing for fans and a bad sign for Max Verstappen, and this week's By the Numbers segment, where we take a close look at the statistics of those around the Cup Series playoff bubble, and why certain drivers are heading in the wrong direction as we head down the stretch of the final four races before the playoffs begin. However, before we get to those numbers, I want to go back to Sunday's Formula One race from Belgium, and ironically enough, dive into some numbers for that series after its 14th race of the season. For starters, I have to call myself out, and for some of you who have followed my channel, you might know what I'm talking about. Since I launched this channel over a year ago, I've had several stories where I've compared NASCAR to F1. I did it earlier this year when talking about how close the NASCAR finishes have been compared to F1. And let's just say it's not even been close. To be fair, the 2024 Cup Series season has been historic with a couple of incredible photo finishes at Atlanta and Kansas. Conversely, the first two F1 races of the year, Max Verstappen won them both by a combined 35 seconds ahead of second place. In other words, hardly competitive. And that brings me back to last weekend's race in Belgium. Lewis Hamilton won for a second time this year after his teammate George Russell was disqualified, but only after he thought he had won for a second time in 2024. Notice what I said there? Hamilton has won twice this year, which took away a second win from Russell. Notice whose name was left out? Verstappen. That's right, Verstappen, who dominated and won an incredible 19 of 22 races in 2023, opened this year with back-to-back wins at Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, and appeared to be on his way to dominating again. Now, don't get me wrong, he's been good and has won 7 times this year, which is still fantastic. But, and it's a big but, there have been 6 other winners this year, or more notably, the most winners at this point of the season in F1 history. And here's an even wilder stat. Verstappen last won at Spain in late June. He's currently gone 4 races without winning. That's shockingly the longest streak without a win since he started his domination in 2020. I interviewed Daniel Suarez earlier this year, and he admitted F1 was boring with Max winning all the time, and he said he even told Max that in a family gathering. Now, that isn't the case, which I've said all along was a reason I didn't want to watch F1 with the same winner all of the time. That problem appears to be fixed. Now, if they can just get those finishes a little tighter. Moving on to our next story, and it's back in the US and silly season. There's been a lot of action over the last month with announcements for 2025, including the most recent, Corey LaJoie out of a ride in the number 7 Spire Motorsports car. We know that Rodney Childers, Kevin Harvick's longtime crew chief and the current leader of the number 4 car driven by Josh Berry, will be at Spire next season. The driver is still undetermined at this point. Childers is just the latest announced departure from the closing Stewart-Haas Racing, with Berry, Chase Briscoe, and Noah Gragson all driving for new teams in 2025. Ryan Preece's future is still unclear. However, in the last couple of days, I've heard rumors from several different sources that another high-profile SHR departure is in the works. Greg Zipadelli, who has been with the organization since 2011 as the competition director, is reportedly headed over to Richard Childress Racing, where Andy Petrie was previously in charge until last month when he unexpectedly announced his retirement. Keith Rodden is the interim competition director. The signing of Zippy would line up with what Kyle Busch had to say at Indy a few weeks ago about the organization making changes and signing on new personnel.
I've certainly heard of some names and some rumblings. I don't know if any signatures have been put on paper or whatnot to get some of those people in. I know we lost one, meaning we did not get him, so that's that.
Nothing has been confirmed if Zipadelli has signed with RCR, but if he has, would it be a help to Busch? I would have to say yes for one simple reason. There's only one way to go for Busch, and that's up. I talked about it in a video a couple weeks ago that Rowdy is in the worst stretch of his career. Actually, I have more on him in a few minutes. But I have to think a new set of eyes coming in, and more importantly, a pair that has been part of multiple championships with Tony Stewart and has been at SHR for more than a dozen years, including the 2014 Cup Series championship and 56 wins, can only help. Now, we'll just have to wait and see if the move actually happens. And finally, let's move on to our By the Number segment for this week. I know we didn't have a race this past weekend, but because I was in Florida last week interviewing Tony Breidinger, I didn't post the segment last week. I want to do that this week, and I want to focus on a couple of things, starting with the average finishing position for the season. I want to begin with Hendrick Motorsports because I'm really fascinated by Chase Elliott and how he compares to his teammates. Let's start with said teammates, specifically those with multiple wins. William Byron's numbers feel like it's feast or famine with the number 2014. You can see Willie B has 5 finishes of 26th or worse, including his season worst finish at Indy, where he finished 38th. All of those numbers add up to an average finish of 14.0. Now, let's move on to the 2021 champion and the Cup Series leader when it comes to wins, and that's Kyle Larson, who has made 4 trips to victory lane, including most recently at the Brickyard. Similar to Byron, the number 5 team has had some wild swings, starting with a 32nd place result at Atlanta, which he followed up a week later with his first win of the year at Las Vegas. Fast forward to his second win of the year at Kansas, and a week later, Larson scored a 34th place finish at Darlington. 3 weeks later, the same thing happened when he won at Sonoma, only to finish 34th a week later at Iowa. Notice a trend here? Those wild swings add up to a 13.0 average finishing position through 21 races since he missed the Coca-Cola 600. And that brings us to Elliott. Look at that stat line at the bottom. He may just have a single win to his credit this year at Texas, but the number 9 team has undeniably been the most consistent car at HMS and in the entire garage throughout the 2024 campaign. He's got a single finish higher than 20th at Chicago for an impressive average finishing position of 10.5. His numbers outside of wins are pretty equal to Larson, who has 2 more top 5s, the same number of top 10s, and 6 fewer top 20s. Elliott's closest competition when it comes to average finishing position is Tyler Reddick, who has an AFP of 11.3. We talked about Corey LaJoie a few minutes ago, and I want to just show why I think Spire opted to part ways with the veteran driver. Let's first look at his numbers, and you can see they are lackluster to say the least, with a single top 5 and top 10, both coming in the season opening race at Daytona. He's only got 8 top 20 finishes and has an average finishing position of 22.7. Now, let's compare him with Carson Hocevar. The rookie driver hasn't recorded any top 5s, but does have 1 more top 10, a 10th at Texas, and an 8 at Gateway. The biggest difference between the 2 drivers is top 20s, where the number 77 has 13 or 5 more than LaJoie. Hocevar's average finishing position is 19.4 or 3.3 full spots ahead of LaJoie. Sticking with Spire comparisons, I want to transition to our last 5 races analysis, and that's where you can see during that time, even Zane Smith has been better than LaJoie with an average finishing position of 19 even, which is tied with Joey Logano, William Byron, and Michael McDowell. The veteran driver is at 20.6. Translation, it's not hard to see how Spire recognized that they can do better than what the number 7 pilot has done in the first 22 races this year and why they made the move. Speaking of moves, I want to now focus on the playoff bubble, and there's been some movement over the last few weeks, and Bubba Wallace has been leading the charge and closed the gap to just 7 points behind Ross Chastain. The 2311 racing driver has been solid over the last 5 races, with his low light coming with a 34th place at New Hampshire, but has followed that up with 3 top 10 results in the last 4 races to come in at 5th overall in our last 5 races analysis at 13.8. Conversely, Chastain has struggled with an AFP of 23.2, including 2 finishes of 33rd or worse at Nashville and Pocono. The other 2 drivers who are currently in on points ahead of Chastain are Chris Buescher and Ty Gibbs. The number 17 RFK racing car has stepped up in the last month or so with a pair of top 5s at New Hampshire and Nashville for an AFP of 12.8. Ty Gibbs, on the other hand, hasn't been great with 3 finishes of 23rd or worse, but a third-place finish through the streets of the Windy City bolstered his AFP to 18.4. And lastly, circling back to Kyle Busch, I just wanted to highlight how much the number 8 team has struggled as of late. At 25.6, the two-time champ has recorded 4 finishes of 25th or worse in the last 5 races and is only ranked higher than regulars John Hunter Nemechek and Harrison Burton. Ouch. All right, guys, that's a wrap on this episode. I want to get your thoughts. Let's start first with F1. I want to hear if you watched this past weekend's race and what you thought. And what do you think about the variety and race winners for the season? It's definitely made it more appealing to me. Do you feel the same? And what do you think about the possibility of Greg Zipadelli coming over to Richard Childress Racing? If it happens, do you think Zippy can get things turned around and help Kyle Busch return to victory lane? And finally, let me know what you think about this week's By the Numbers segment. What do you think about Chase Elliott's season so far and how he's been so consistent, even outperforming his multiple winning teammates when it comes to average finishing position? And what about that playoff bubble? Do you think Bubba Wallace can keep up his solid run and pass Ross Chastain for that final spot? Or do you think there might be another surprise winner that adds a little spice into the playoff mix as we head down the stretch? And finally, a couple of last orders of business. I want to announce the winner of the autographed Tony Breidinger hero card from my last video, and it is Dude-ZM4GJ. Congratulations, I'll reply to your comment. And I also wanted to let you know I've got some exciting partnership news in the coming weeks that I know you're going to love. Let's just say, it's pristine. Thanks as always for supporting the channel and have a great rest of your day.